Hi! Today we're going to be talking about the incredible معجنات. And معجنات is basically pastries in Arabic. And growing up, my grandmothers or my tetas would always have معجنات in their freezer ready for whenever anyone was going to pop in. And there was always this kind of feeling of community, an open door policy, where a neighbor would want to come in, grab some sugar, and then end up staying for lunch or staying for a cup of coffee and a bite. And so we adopted this kind of tradition of having معجنات in the freezer, ready for whenever we want to host. And I kind of adopted that tradition from them. And I love that tradition of having معجنات in my freezer or pastries in my freezer. So today we're going to be talking about a very, very special one, which is called Akkawi and wild za'atar. And Akkawi and wild za'atar is one of those things that I think is not very well known. We have so many different pastries that are very popular around the world, but wild za'atar and Akkawi is kind of one of the lesser known ones. So I want to teach you guys that today. And I'm going to take a minute to talk about za'atar itself. Za'atar is one of those things that is native to Palestine, of course, and it grows wild in the mountains. It grows in abundance. And the za'atar that you guys know that you love is the one that you use in manaish and salads. You find it in all of the supermarkets and all of the stores. And that za'atar is made out of basically this beautiful leaf. So of course that za'atar has the sesame, it has a bit of sama, it has all of these different elements that makes that basically that za'atar mix that you want. But the base of it is the wild za'atar. And the wild za'atar, it has this like velvety texture to it, and it has a bit of like a peppery flavor to it, and it's harvested in the springtime. And what I love about za'atar, and it's a story I love to tell, and of course everything that I do comes with a story. And the idea behind za'atar is that it's used as a reference in poetry, in music, in spoken and written word, as a reference to the resilience and strength of Palestinian people. And the reason why it's said that is because basically za'atar, it grows obviously wild in abundance in the mountains of Palestine. And as long as you keep the roots intact in the ground, so if you cut the stems off and the roots are still there, it will continue to grow and it will actually flourish. So it will grow in abundance all around. And that's why basically poets and spoken word artists basically use that as a reference to the Palestinian people, because if you keep on cutting us down, we will continue to come back up. And I love sharing that story with people because I do believe that our culture is very intertwined, Our culture, our food, our identity, they're all interlinked. And so I love to share this story with people, and I hope that it sticks with you guys. So that's about the za'atar, and of course I've got it in my beautiful Hebron ceramic. I never go anywhere without it. If I could make a pocket-sized version of it, I would. But this is actually fresh za'atar, and you don't have to necessarily use za'atar. So obviously it's a seasonal thing. And I always love to encourage people to use the items that are in season. And I got access to some of this za'atar for me to use in the recipe today. But what you can do is when you get fresh za'atar or you have access to fresh za'atar, all you need to do is wash it, remove it off of the stems, wash it, put it out on a sheet, and you can put it out in the sun if you want to, and let it basically sun dry. So in the same way that you would sun-dry tomatoes, you would do the same with the za'atar. And it would basically shrivel up and it would still remain intact as a leaf. And then you'd be able to use it year-round. So you can put it in your pantry, absolutely nothing will happen to it. You just need to make sure you remove all the moisture out of it so that it can continue to be used basically. So today we're going to be doing this, and it is a bit of a lengthy process, not in terms of making it, but in terms of the wait time. So this dough, and I've got my beautiful dough mixer here. It actually says on the side, I don't know if you can see, but it says here, hey, made it. And that's something that my nephew Nabil says all the time to me. And my sister actually customized it onto my dough mixer. And so this is like my most prized possession in my kitchen. And I honestly, my life has changed since I got a dough mixer, so highly recommend that you get one. I'm going to put my dough hook onto it because we want to make sure that it basically mixes everything in the recipe. And what we're going to do is, so we've got all of our elements here for the dough. And the dough is actually going to take 2 hours to rise. So the longer that you let it rise, the better. And I've got here all-purpose flour. So I've got about maybe 2.5 cups. You can adjust. With baking, it does vary a little bit. It depends on the environment that you're in. It could be hot, it could be cold. It depends on the type of yeast that you're using. So always just kind of get a feel for what you're doing with the dough, and you can adjust. You might need to increase. Sometimes I have to increase my flour, so or reduce my flour. It really depends. So I've got about 2.5 cups here, and I'm gonna just put them in. Okay. And of course, you're gonna get all the ingredients and all the recipes and measurements for everything, so don't worry about that. And then I'm gonna put my za'atar in here. So the za'atar, don't worry, you can keep it as a whole leaf because when you start to mix the dough, it's gonna basically break it up for you. So you don't have to take the time to chop it up. So I'll just put the rest of these in here. And then I've got like a beautiful mix of things in this bowl. I've got milk powder. The milk powder kind of just softens the dough. You don't necessarily have to include it, but what I love about it is it just kind of like creates this like fluffy pillow. And when you're baking, you always want to have that texture. And then of course I've got my active yeast. So the active yeast is very, very important. You obviously want the dough to rise. We've got a bit of baking powder in there as well, very minimal. Tiny bit of sugar, a bit of salt, of course my fine sea salt, because I don't go anywhere without that either. And that is basically it. So milk powder, sugar, salt, yeast, and a bit of baking powder. And we're gonna be putting that inside here as well. And you can basically just put everything together. And then in this bowl, I've got olive oil, of course, because olive oil is incorporated in everything that we do. And I've got some warm water. The warm water is put into this dish or into this recipe to basically activate the yeast. So I'm just gonna add that in. And you don't necessarily need to mix your dry ingredients first and then your wet ingredients, because honestly, it's all just gonna get mixed together. And then the final element is basically our eggs. So just a simple 1 egg into this dish. Make sure you don't get any shells inside. Okay, just gonna grab a paper towel. And then we are gonna start churning. So you're gonna keep on churning, and I wanna basically show you the consistency of what you want your dough to be. I might find that I'm gonna need a bit more flour, so I'm gonna basically see. I'm gonna start on a low speed just to make sure that everything just kind of starts to get incorporated together, and then I'll speed it up until it gets to the point that I want it to be at, and to make sure that my dough is completely cohesive so I can just cover it and leave it. So everything is basically coming together, it's churning, it's beautiful, it smells incredible. So I would highly recommend that you just kind of like put your head in there, have a little sniff, because it's amazing. And the smell of the za'atar, it just smells so fresh, and the color of it is beautiful. And when we get to the point of like shaping them, you're gonna see the incredible contrast of kind of like the neutral color of the dough and the greenness of the za'atar leaf. So now it's kind of coming together, so I'm just gonna speed it up a little bit. Might get a little loud in here. Okay, so it's nearly there. You can see the dough and everything. I'm gonna obviously show it to you guys once it's ready. And you can do this without a dough mixer. Okay, so I think it's nearly there. I'm gonna take this off the machine, and I'm gonna just mix it a little bit with my hand. Oh, we have a rogue piece that flew out. But basically, you want it to be this consistency. So you want it to like basically form as a ball. I'm just picking up some of the rogue pieces that are at the bottom. And like I said, you don't have to have a dough mixer for this. You can literally just knead it with your hand. You just might need a little bit more time. I might need to increase my liquid intake here a little bit. But no, I think it's looking good. Okay, So this is roughly the consistency of what you would need. And I just want to show it to you guys so that when you come to make it, you might need a little ladder. Okay, so see, this is the consistency of your dough ball. It needs to have like a bit of like elasticity to it. You don't want it to be dry. If you can see when I pinch it, it's actually kind of stretching out. It's not flaky. It's got like a really nice consistency to it. What you want to do is you just want to basically like curl it up into like a little ball, drop it back in this, and then cover it with cling, or you can even just put a towel on top of it and park it to the side for about 2 hours. If it's too cold in your room, AC's on, or just in general, you're in a colder city, a colder environment, what I do recommend is that you just put the bowl into the oven. Oven doesn't need to be on, but the oven kind of creates this like incubator feel to it. So then you're able to basically put it into the oven and absolutely nothing will happen to it. As long as you don't turn it on, it should be fine. And it kind of just like creates this like hotter or warmer environment, which allows the yeast to kind of activate and rise up. So we're gonna leave it for 2 hours and we'll get back together and start working on our Akkawi and wild za'atar. So it's been 2 hours, the dough has been rising. It's in a very big bowl, so if you're gonna be making a larger quantity, obviously it's gonna expand a lot more, but it smells absolutely incredible. So you can see like it's got like all of the like different textures, the yeast has come through, and it's retained its moisture. So I'm gonna move this out of the way, and it is now time for us to start working on the shape of the Akkawi and the wild za'atar. But before we do that, I want to tell you guys a little bit about the Akkawi cheese. So this is Akkawi cheese. Again, I've got it in my beautiful Palestinian ceramic. And the Akkawi cheese is actually from the city of Akka. So Akka is actually a coastal city in Palestine, and it's known for its Akkawi cheese. Akkawi cheese has got it's got like kind of like a similar texture to halloumi cheese, in the same way that you would find like Nabilsi cheese. And it's typically a salty cheese, so you would need to put it in water to remove some of that salt, kind of like brine it a little bit to remove that saltiness from it. I like to remove a bit of the saltiness from it, but obviously keep salt in it because it is a savory dish. If you're putting Akkawi cheese in a dessert, you would need to remove all of the salt from it. Although in desserts, I do like to keep a bit of that salty flavor in it, just to kind of balance out the sweetness of the dessert. In this context, we're going to be using it in its salty format. And it's a beautiful kind of creamy cheese. And it's got this kind of like creamy, earthy flavor to it. And it really balances out the sharpness of the za'atar. So that's why it's perfectly paired with it. And the way that I like to do it is, what I typically recommend is that you just kind of like roll your dough around, make sure that it's kind of like all moist and everything is good. And then what I want to do is, what I like to do typically, but I'm not going to do it today, is I like to weigh my dough out. So if you're batch making for a large quantity and you want to make sure that every single piece is going to be the same size, what I do is I put a scale, I put a bowl, an empty bowl, put on to 0, and I put my dough in. And I have the weight of my dough. And then I can kind of decide, let's say I want to make 30 pieces of my Akkawi. I divide the dough on 30 pieces and I get my basic kind of measurement for each piece. And in that way you can guarantee the basic measurement of each piece and make sure that they're roughly the same size. But of course our tetayats and our grandmothers never used to do that. They'd pinch off a piece and they'd work with it. So that's how I'm going to do it today. I'm going old school teta style, and we've cut the Akkawi cheese up into cubes so we can put it in the center. So what I used to do actually before was I used to put the cheese into the dough. You can do that if you want to, but you won't kind of get that like cheesy texture because the cheese obviously melts into the dough. So you could potentially use that version if you want to, like, let's say open up the dough ball and fill it with something, let's say labneh or something creamy on the inside, kind of use it like as a bread. But if you want to eat it as its own bite, then it would be good to just cut it up into squares, omit from putting it into the dough and putting it in the center. And what we're going to do is, so I took a piece, I flattened it out, I'm gonna put my cheese in the center, and I'm gonna basically fold it up. And you want to make sure that your Akkawi is completely sealed from the bottom. If it's not, then it's gonna open up when you bake. And you're just gonna basically do a little bit of like a bowl again, make sure that everything is tight and everything is closed. And then what I wanna do is, obviously for decoration, but also for flavor and for texture, is I like to dip it into water. And then I've got a mixture here of toasted sesame seeds and black sesame seeds. And that, first of all, creates a beautiful kind of like look on the top. Look how pretty that is. But it also gives you, it complements the flavors of the cheese. It complements the flavor of the za'atar as well. And it looks pretty. So it's a nice kind of addition on top. And we always like to kind of have this like beautiful finish at the end. And these you can batch make way in advance. Bake them. You can also partially bake them, but I would recommend you fully bake them. Put them, let them cool down, and then put them in the freezer, and absolutely nothing will happen to them. When you want to do to bring them down, just bring them down, put them in the oven for maybe 5 to 10 minutes maximum to just heat up, and then you are good to go. So I'm just going to continue working on these and filling up the tray. This amount would probably make you about 30 pieces, depending on the size. You can obviously make them smaller, you can make them bigger. It really depends on what you want. So that's more of a personal preference. I like them to be kind of like this size because it's also going to expand in the oven. It's got the yeast, so don't forget that it's going to continue to grow in the oven, and it's kind of like a nice bite-sized flavor. So I'm going to continue to do these and fill up the tray, and then the next step that we're going to go to is putting it into the oven. So the tray is ready. Look at all these beautiful Akkawi and wild za'atar balls. Honestly, I'm ready to eat them as is, but we're gonna have to bake them first. So the oven's been preheated to 180 degrees Celsius. It's gonna go into the oven for about 15 minutes. My oven is gas, so it might take a little bit less time than your oven. So all you need to do is basically, when it's in the oven, just check the bottom. If it's getting a bit of a golden color, then you know that it's baked. And then what I like to do is I like to turn the broil on the top just for a couple of minutes, maximum 5 minutes, just to kind of get a golden color from the top. But because it already has the sesame and the black sesame, it already has a nice aesthetic from the top. So it's gonna go into the oven and we'll touch base as soon as they're done. So the Akkawi is ready, it's out of the oven. I'm just gonna bring it out. And look at these beauties. It's a little bit hot, but honestly, it smells incredible. And look at them, they're gorgeous. You can see the color from the bottom. They've got that golden color that we want, and a bit of golden color from the top because I put them on the broil. And now I wanna just put them out a little bit onto this beautiful Palestinian ceramic tray. And look at them, they're beautiful. You can sit and snack on them. You can have them as an afternoon snack if you want. Or like I said, you can freeze them. So just let them cool down, put them in a Ziploc bag, put them in the freezer, and they are good to go. And it's such a pretty plate to put out with your friends, or if you're just like craving something as a little snack. And here you go. So the Akkawi is done. I hope you enjoy this recipe as much as I do. And I hope that you love the wild za'atar as much as I do. It is incredible flavor. And it's honestly one of my favorites, ma'ajanat. So enjoy.